thought we needed a little bit of fanfare. How's that? Here we are. It's the 24th day of June, heading into the first full weekend of the summer of 2022. And the premier of the province out in the front lawns at Queen's Park today. It was more like the sweating in as opposed to the swearing in, although it wasn't quite as hot as they thought it might be. Anyway, lots to talk about. Dave Trafford here. This is the Daily Brief, but we have gathered the On the Ledge team here to analyze and talk about and kick around all of the news that came out of Queen's Park today. And that, of course, is the new cabinet. Sort of new, right? Might be 1.1 as opposed to 2.0 the way this is shaping up. John Wright, Keith Leslie, and Sabrina and Angie here for the fun and games here in the podcast this Friday. All right, so let's start. We got about, by my count, is it 30 new members of cabinet now, Sabrina? That's not new members, but 30 members in the new cabinet?
Yeah, 30 up from 28. Some new faces. I think, probably the big one is Sylvia Jones, who's not exactly new, but she's on a new file, taking over from Christine Elliott as Health Minister and Deputy Premier. And then we've got basically the same crew on some of the biggest files, Transportation Minister Caroline Mulroney, Finance Minister Peter Bethlen-Falvey, a lot of familiar faces and some rookies too. I think, in particular, some regional nods, George Peary from Timmins and Neil Lumsden from Hamilton, previously NDP territory. So lots to unpack here, but it kind of feels like we didn't want to rock the boat on this. Bit of a boring sweating in, we'll call it, kind of like the campaign itself.
Well, you know what? The dogs are excited about it. I could hear them barking in the background.
Yeah, that's the neighbors there.
We'll take that. Listen, though, one of the things that surprised me, two things. I think, Sabrina, to you, because earlier, just I guess about a week ago, when we were starting to talk about or made the announcement that this is when we were going to have the cabinet announcement. And I think as a footnote in one of yours, you had suggested that Lisa MacLeod would be on the outs, and you were hearing that Michael Tobolo might not make the front bench again, which surprised me. I mean, considering the guy's been the Dragon Slayer twice in a row, pretty much put the Tory boot on the throat of the Liberals. I mean, he's back, but that to me would have been a strange decision to make.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, we were right about Lisa MacLeod, who actually just announced that she was taking some time off just to deal with mental health issues, work on her health, that sort of thing. So maybe not so surprising, but she was also kind of on the bad list too. She had some negative headlines most recently for, using taxpayer-funded riding association money, to kind of supplement her own ministerial salary. Not a good look, especially if you're, Doug Ford. That's definitely off-brand for him. But you're right. Michael Tobolo, he's kind of been this fading star in the Ford government. He was a full-on minister of community safety and correctional services, what we now call the Solicitor General's office, and now he's associate minister of mental health and addictions. But I don't think that they wanted to demote him because essentially he's the one that can take credit for knifing Stephen Del Duca. He ended up holding onto the seat in Vaughan Woodbridge, and as a result, also of the Liberals' poor showing in June, earlier June 2nd. Del Duca stepped down. So I think some surprises, some, not so much surprises there. It's Friday.
I think when we left it off, I think just after the election, and we were speculating on who the new leaders would be and what kind of runway now Doug Ford has, Keith Leslie, I jokingly suggested that by the time they actually cut the ribbons on the 413, it'll be Premier Michael Ford by then. Well, he's got his foot in the door now.
Does he ever? Holy cow. Of all the appointments today, I would guess this one would be, I don't know if it's the biggest surprise, because it was predicted that this guy would get into cabinet, even though he was elected at the age of 28, just June 2nd for the first time. He's the Premier's nephew. This is his qualifications to become a full-fledged minister in the cabinet, Citizenship and Multiculturalism. Granted, it's not a frontline ministry at this point for a provincial government, but he's a full-on minister. There's a $50,000 pay bump right off the bat, not to mention the car and driver that comes with it. It's a nice lifestyle if you can be qualified for it, but I'm not so sure this man is. I don't mean to attack him out of the blue, but what on earth are the qualifications given the 80-member backbench that Doug Ford is dealing with? And it's never easy when you've got that large a backbench or that large a caucus to have to pick a cabinet. But I would have thought that appointment in particular would put several experienced noses well out of joint, and perhaps rightly so. I was concerned when you started this by asking Sabrina about, the size of the cabinet, the number. I was told there would be no math. There'd be no math today. And I just can't deal with that.
So you're scoring below Michael Ford? Is that what you're
Absolutely. This is what I'm telling you. I'm not
Okay.
qualified for that job either. I did think it was interesting, though, to watch the newbies. I mean, the biggest promotion, of course, for a newbie is the new Solicitor General, Michael Kersner, in York Centre, from Toronto, York Centre. That's a huge jump for him right to the front bench, right? The Solicitor General is a key position. And of course, it was vacated by Sylvia Jones, who's now the Health Minister and Deputy Premier. And the reason, the Health Ministry is the only major one that really changed here. And that's because Christine Elliott resigned, did not run again in the June 2nd election. So we had to get a new Health Minister. But if you look at the biggies, education, labor, finance, economic development and trade, they've all stayed the same, just to stay pat. So your description of it as a 1.1 cabinet as opposed to 2.0, I think is bang on. But that's, we've seen this with this government. They're not really prone to a lot of major cabinet shuffles. It's been very fine tuning. When ministers get into trouble, one minister's out, maybe one or two are moved around. He sticks to the people that he danced with. He dances with who brung him. So it's interesting to see that he's played this fairly safe. But as I say, the one real, to me, glaring, I don't know if it's an error, but glaring nepotism promotion is Michael Ford to a full-on minister. I mean, some of the others, Neil Lumsden, the former Ticats CFL star, him getting a cabinet. Well, Hamilton needed a cabinet minister, and I'm sure Donna Scully would have thought it might have been her. But, he's tourism and sport minister. It seems to fit.
Yeah, kind of makes sense.
Graydon Smith from Bracebridge, he's got M&R and Forestry. Again, held on to a key riding. The Tories did not want to lose that. It was up for grabs in Perry Sound, Muskoka. And, staying put. Education, Stephen Leche staying put as well. I don't know if that's good or bad. I mean, I know some of the education unions are a bit concerned, but they're heading into negotiations now. And at least they're not dealing with a new minister. There's someone who's up to speed on the file, and they're going to, those negotiations are going to be tough, but at least the minister in charge of them is going to be very experienced, if nothing else.
Well, John, isn't it probably the case where there were probably a lot of people saying, I don't want this shit show because we already know that the unions are lining up for negotiations. Lecce built this problem. Let's let them deal with it.
I suppose so, but I'm also going to go to the same place that Keith was, and that is that you basically haven't made a lot of changes to your major players because you don't want to disrupt what they know. I mean, it takes a while to understand the file. And I think there's something different about this term rather than the last term when Doug Ford took office. And that is, and I say this with the greatest respect, there's no crazy in the corner office. I mean, you're not going to have a year of vindictive, ridiculous decisions and clapping EAs every time somebody makes a decision and having to wear silly ties in the legislature and bombastic statements. I mean, that's what killed this government in the first 12 months and caused the government to go to 23% in the polls. And it was saved by COVID, where it bounced up to 65. You don't have that. When you've got, this is a very interesting thing where it's almost like the first, years, despite COVID, was kind of the trial ground for how you run a government. Now what you've got is a government with a lot of seasoned executives. You haven't got a lot of change there. Even Sylvia Jones, as Deputy Premier, Minister of Health, she was at all those press conferences. I mean, she knows that file as well as Christine Elliott does, and knows the deputies and everybody else. So it's a good, solid cabinet. The thing that is interesting to me always is how quick they get to work. The last 5 days of the campaign, the Premier was nowhere. Like, didn't say a word, no need to say a word, front runner, wins, the big stuff, sends a note saying, thanks so much, really good to see you at swearing in day. No indication yet that I can see, although Sabrina, you may know when the cabinet is going to come back. I mean, there's already stuff built into, give people the 5 cent gas tax break, which the Premier certainly said today was a big thing and got a lot of applause from people. But I think that what the comfort level you have is a lot of people know their files, the big files, the finance minister, everybody else. they can now go to the office and just start doing stuff rather than having to take the summer off, having to learn all that stuff that you would have to, and coming back at some point and having, people who might make mistakes. So I think this is the Doug Ford government that I think is going to be probably the most solid in the first 2 years of moving forward, but also understands that with the rising prices, inflation, and all of that sort of stuff, it's going to want to duck it and throw it north to the Trudeau government and to the Bank of Canada saying, look, we can only do certain things here, but the rest of it's up to them. So it's going to be a very interesting 30 to 45 days ahead.
Okay, I want to get to the cost of living question, but first, how quickly do they have to come back, Sabrina, to get the gas tax change?
Well, I guess they could probably do that proactively as well. Like, obviously, that would take effect July 1st. And as was promised, like, I don't think they're going to come back before then. We've got the Canada Day long weekend coming up too, so I think I'm hearing likely it will be after that. But yeah, basically Ford confirmed there will be a brief, summer sitting, get the budget passed, and then I've been hearing they might come back a little later in September as planned. But this budget / re-election platform is going to be slightly tweaked. Obviously, there was kind of this late in the game during the campaign promise to raise ODSP rates by 5%, which wasn't initially budgeted. And I just kind of wanted to add one thing because I just got off the phone with a PC insider, and I won't name names, but I guess the spin on the whole Michael Ford thing, which I was kind of pressing them about, obviously the criticism is going to be that this is nepotism. He's super young, and not to, discount his history in politics, at the local level. But the message, and I guess the spin maybe from the Tories, is that having a Ford, someone with the Ford name on multiculturalism, and that file, they wanted to send a clear message to like ethnic communities that, we want to bring you into our tent. And I think that was a big part of, Doug Ford's resounding majority, is that they kind of did all this outreach to, groups that might not have necessarily have voted for them in the past. I'm thinking labor as well. And obviously we know Monty McNaughton stayed on that file. So that's just a bit of gossip.
Oh, come on. You reach out to multicultural communities by appointing a multicultural community representative as the minister. You don't point another white guy who happens to be your nephew. I'm sorry, I don't buy that.
It was for sure it's spin. And like, you can kind of see even just the makeup of the cabinet too, right? Like, only 7 women out of 30, only, 7 people of color. The people of color, for the most part are on junior files, smaller ministries, that type of thing. But if you're interested in what the talking points of that is, that's what they're saying.
But I don't think anybody's really going to care about Michael Ford going into power. I mean, this is all inside the Beltway stuff, but he better be squeaky clean for the next 2.5 years or so. I mean, because if anything happens, he's tied directly to the guy who's driving the ship. And that's the only exposure that he may. I mean, if he keeps his head down and he does well and he represents Ford Nation, Bob's your uncle. The rest of the backbenchers, there's parliamentary assistants to be appointed and a whole bunch of other things. So they got work to do. And what you do with this big a cadre of people is you create, within the caucus task forces and committees. You got to keep them busy over the next period of time. So I would just say I don't think many people are going to care about what happens with Michael Ford unless something breaks where he gets caught doing something, and that's not going to be anytime soon.
Well, let's face it. Most people can't name a cabinet minister. Most people pay very little attention to this on a day-to-day basis. It's us. Yeah. And it's interesting, post-election, the cabinet makeup might get a little bit more attention, but it's not going to get very much. Let's be honest about that.
Well, having said all of that, vis-a-vis Michael Ford, I think he has actually exceeded expectation at City Hall as a retail politician. I think he has been really good for the Ford brand, where Doug has taken Rob's reputation and managed to put it in the background, but taken what was good from Rob Ford as the mayor in terms of his abilities to appeal on a retail level. Doug Ford has kind of evolved. We've all admitted that over the last 4 years. And I think Michael has actually promoted that evolution to some degree. So I'd be curious to see. You're right, though, Keith. He's not in a high pressure, high glare scenario. So if this is a place for him to kind of learn some ministerial chops, the next after John's first 2 years, the next 2 years is really going to be the question to see where he lands. Here's the question I've got for you, Sabrina, and before the election, it might have been before, just around the time the call came, we had the $10 a day daycare, childcare deal with Ottawa. And the province announced, and it was Minister Lecce announcing that, don't worry, we're actually going to have checks in your hands sometime in May. Well, that didn't happen for families. Right now, there are providers who were texting me today saying, we're not opting in because we cannot provide the level of service that our parents and our families have come to expect from us, particularly in the Montessori systems, where, we just can't afford to be involved in this. So if you are going to actually want to take advantage of the $10 a day, eventually, daycare center, this is going to be like Hunger Games, because there are going to be people who leave the Montessori school in search of the providers who can come up with the subsidized plan. In a strange kind of backward way, it sounds like we're just going to amplify the daycare crisis if this isn't treated properly.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Lecce has his work cut out for him. We already talked about teacher bargaining coming up. I don't think the teacher unions are necessarily happy about that. Now you guys could maybe hear my dog coughing something up. I feel like that's a nice sound effect for this conversation. Right, exactly. But no, you're right. Daycare right now is kind of like a dog's breakfast, right? Like there's all this finger pointing happening too between municipalities and the province as well. Not a long runway, obviously, to get this going up in September. I think Toronto only just started accepting those applications. And so
they only had a town hall meeting this week with the operators. They haven't even started accepting applications. This is so backward.
Right. That's right. And you know what, though? The thing is with Lecce being in charge of this file is that he's done this thing where he doesn't quite answer questions when you put him on the spot. Like he gives these very long-winded talking points. And from a comms perspective, which is, like kind of his background too, that's something that the Conservatives like. And I think it's going to come down to like reading between those lines, getting this done because, the Ford PCs, they really bit off huge, big promises, especially on affordability, especially on childcare. And it's going to be up to them to really deliver. Meanwhile, we've got weakened opposition parties, that are going to be preoccupied with their own leadership races. They're going to have interim leaders in place. And really with this 83 seat majority, Ford can pretty much do whatever he wants right now. And it's going to be a long 4 years until the next election. So we might see some of the unpopular stuff, some of the maybe, broken promises, if you will. That's going to all happen now, and that's going to come down now. And obviously childcare is top of mind for a lot of people.
Well, affordability, John, since the election has become even more of a crisis for people across this country, whether it's gas or food or daycare or whatever it might be. So this is getting really to be a fine point. I'm not sure you can slide out from underneath this one, especially after being so vocal and promissory and saying the money's going to be in your bank account in May.
Yeah, I've done a lot of polling on the economy in a recession lately, along with others who have done this. And I do think, however, the focus is really federally. And that's why I started out by saying, I don't think that the government necessarily has to worry about being tagged with having the problem with inflation or causing it or not doing enough on it. They have an opportunity to do some things on it. But I think genuinely there's a group of Ontarians who are between the ages of 18 and 34 who have never experienced anything like this in their lives. You got to go back 38 years to see inflation like this, and people who are on hourly wages, $23, $24 an hour, who maybe have to drive to work, are getting crushed, absolutely crushed. And I don't know whether or not you see yourself as a benevolent government and sort of say, this is what I'm going to do, or you call up Krista Freeland and say, hey, remember when we were getting all that stuff from you before with COVID? Maybe we need some help now. I don't know what you do, except to say that I'd be very interested to see what the government books look like right now after gas hikes, and the revenue that's flowing into the coffers right now. It's funny. I said to my daughter yesterday, we pulled into my brother gave us a 2006 Ford Focus. Okay, folks, remember those? Stick shift. And it was supposed to be meant for the kids to go to university with, but I ended up with it because they would never be seen with it. And
that's what we bought my daughter when she graduated from university. That was our gift to her. I don't know where it is now, but
no, they don't want to be anywhere near it. So they've got the Encore and driving around in that. But I got it a few months ago and I filled it up and it was like $69 to fill the tank up. And yesterday it was $80. And I was standing at the Shell station, and as I was just about finished, this guy with a Range Rover beside on the other side, as he passed me, he said, "That's a record," and so you've got two interesting. You've got an image there. You got a Ford Focus 2006 that's trying to make as much mileage as possible, and the low income guy, I'm not, but there you go, versus the Range Rover who probably put in $140 to fill his tank. But then you've got revenue that's coming out of that going into the coffer. So I'd be very interested to see how benevolent this government wants to play. You want to help 18 to 34s? Why don't you forgive their student debt? Why don't you, if you can, give it away. If you want to do something on the backs of whatever the housing thing is coming from the federal government, then do something around that. But I think the Ford government, I'd be interested in what the three of you think. I think the Ford government's going to be able to duck a lot of this for the time being and send it north up to the Bank of Canada and everybody else. But I do believe that if we continue talking about a recession, we're sure going to have one, because we don't have one yet, but we're going to be into one soon enough if we don't have something more positive to say.
Okay, then let me ask you this. Put it this way, Keith. If I heard somebody else saying this week, the reason that voter turnout was so low is because people were comfortable with Doug. They got to know Doug to the point where everything's fine. We'll just let things cruise along, and that's okay. So as if June the 2nd was that the end of it. I think that the getting to know Doug is going to be between now and Christmas. We are really going to find out what Doug Ford is all about. There will not be the craziness in the corner office. There will not be COVID. There will be a track record to look at. There will be experience in his cabinet. There will be no excuses, I don't think.
Well, if he was willing to cut loose in the first term when he had just been elected and slashed Toronto City Council and bring in the notwithstanding clause whenever it was needed, left, right, and willy-nilly, now that he's got an even larger majority, as you say, the second term with an experienced cabinet, what will he do? I mean, he's going to be emboldened to do whatever he really feels is necessary to do, what he wants to do. But I just want to back up for a second to that low voter turnout. Mm-hmm. I think the media as well have to take a large part of the responsibility for this. I think that us saying basically from beginning to end that Doug Ford was going to get reelected, maybe a minority, but in all likelihood a majority. So the race is for second. And we all said that, and everybody reported the race. Well, people who are voting don't care about second place. They want to know who the premier is going to be. So if the premier is going to be Doug Ford, and now to your point, people got to know Doug, and they got to realize he's not, an ideological hog. He kicked the anti-vaxxers out of the PC caucus, which I think was a really, really smart move. It showed people he's willing to, take steps that are necessary to stick with then the pandemic the rules that were necessary. He's just done the right thing. I think people are willing to accept that, but they stayed home. Even I think some conservatives stayed home. Well, I don't need to go vote. Doug's, he's up by 10 points. He's good for that. And liberals and New Democrats are people who weren't decided between them. They just saw them basically fighting each other a lot more than fighting Ford in particular. They were fighting for second place, as it were. So I think that all of that helped depress that vote and help keep it down. I know that, the Premier's office and the PC party headquarters, they wanted a low voter turnout, and they calculated a campaign. John mentioned, the Premier wasn't anywhere to be seen in the last 5 days. That all worked to help depress that vote as well. But I do think the media have to take some responsibility for that as well. John wants to weigh in. Can I just jump
in for a second? I just got to jump in because I was away for the final days of the campaign, but I watched it from afar. Look, the Liberals ran a crappy campaign. There's no other way to say this.
No doubt about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. When your leader who's got a red sign is walking around with a blue vest, you got a problem right there. But secondly, remember how
Fire the dresser.
Look, all of us, including Sabrina, were talking at the outset of the campaign, and we were kind of on the consensus that if everybody's talking about affordability, then there is no issue. I mean, you got to have a wedge to come through. I think where the Liberals fell down was the day that they stood up and started talking about mandatory vaccines for school kids, and then followed by the next day of grade 13, and followed by the next day of a couple of other,
gun control. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there was about 4 days there where people kind of went, what is this all about? And said, I'm out of here. Look, and there's always this proportional representation nonsense that goes on at the end of it. We've had a referendum. We had a referendum in British Columbia, where you'd expect to get it, and you didn't get it. So that's over with. Look, the Liberals could have, I think, because we talked about this, could have represented the very people who are getting crushed by this inflation right now. That 18 to 34 disaffected, don't have a voice type of thing. And instead, they didn't get it. They didn't get it from Andrea, and they didn't get it from the Liberals. And the Liberals had an opportunity to do it, and they didn't do it. So kudos to the Tory campaign for running, just a smooth running machine right over top of the other ones. But people didn't turn out because the others weren't worthwhile to go out for. That's my view.
It wasn't a change election.
It was absolutely not.
It was not going to be. So that keeps the vote down as well. It all played out. It played into Doug Ford's hands just the way they wanted it to. I thought it was interesting. I don't know if any of you caught the roundtable that Martin Redcon hosted with the various campaign managers. And Nick Kouvalis said that in the extensive polling they were doing, the Conservatives were doing ahead of the election, they said most people, it was just after the pandemic, people would just get on with it. Let's just get on with it.
Entirely.
And he said that is where they got get her done, from get on with it. And he said it means something different to everybody that's involved with wanting to get something done. Just get on with life. And I think that really, really nailed it. It wasn't a change election. There was no huge desire for change. That kept the voter turnout down, obviously. When there's, when it's time, I think it was David Peterson said, when it's time for a hanging, everybody shows up.
Okay. So, since then in the election, we've had all kinds of reading of the entrails. And I think you had quoted somebody in your newsletter at Queen's Park Observer, Sabrina, suggesting that if the Liberals don't play this right, and there's not a large window here, this could literally have been an extinction event for the Ontario Liberal Party. I do not disagree. I'm going to suggest that they're going to have a hell of a time getting up off the mat, considering the thrashing they got at the hands of the Tories.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a moment of reckoning for both the Liberals and the NDP right now, but it also is kind of like this. It seems like it's signaling this big change just in Ontario politics, like in general. Obviously, the Liberal brand has been strong in Ontario. We had seen the polling, at least, the Liberals were very much like in contention in second place for a lot of those polls. And I think a lot of people said that spoke to the Liberal brand itself, not necessarily, who Stephen Del Duca was. A lot of people didn't know him. He had a lot of political baggage. He had even joked himself that he's like not charismatic. So of course there's a ton of factors in there, but they only gained one seat. Like when it all shakes out, they don't even have recognized party status. And I think to John's point, they didn't really, neither the NDP or the Liberals put up this, compelling alternative to Ford, and they didn't really do enough to get out their own votes. And I think, you're quoting Jonathan Scott, who ran the leadership campaign for now MP Michael Coteau, who's no longer at Queen's Park anymore. And Coteau, came in a very distant second place to Del Duca, who was, among other things, like the party really liked him for his fundraising capabilities. But obviously, he kind of dropped the ball this time around. And so I think that while they're, going through this leadership contest in the near future, it's going to come down to the grassroots, and even with the NDP, I think one thing that Jonathan Scott said was, Ontarians don't like it when Liberals talk down to them. And that was kind of the vibe from their campaign, right? The choice is yours. And that was their campaign slogan. And it's kind of like talking down to voters, like the choice is yours or else, and so I think, that they're going to have to really look at things, because the NDP, they might have lost 9 seats, but they still formed official opposition there. And so that should be a real wake up call to the Liberal Party.
Well, I think that they should have learned that when they lost and Kathleen Wynne, her team lost. That should have been the first thing they learned there in terms of that they were talking down to people. That was the message clearly. And I also think that it was ironic that they were all about gun control and they shot themselves in the head this time around. So, it just didn't make any sense. The disconnect was incredible. So what is the status of Queen's Park Observer over the summer while the House is taking its rest?
We're still going at it. There's, lots of gossip. We had the cabinet sworn in today. I think we're going to get parliamentary assistants. Those are kind of like, the ministers, second in command. I think those are going to be signed off. Ford's going to do that at some point today. We've got the budget coming up. So there's still, stuff happening around Queen's Park. It's, no rest for Ontario politics.
There you go. All right. I would suggest to those of you who want to stay up to date, sign up for Sabrina's newsletter. It's the Queen's Park Observer. Keith Leslie is here. John Wright. I'm Dave Trafford. This is the Daily Brief with the On the Ledge panel. It's a Story Studio Network production.